you for attending today and submitting your questions to us. We've already received hundreds of questions, so we'll try to answer most of those during the webinar. But as those of you who have attended any of our CBD webinars in the past know, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we invite you to ask questions via your chat feature, which should be on the right-hand side top of your screen during the webinar. And we will answer all of those questions as well towards the end. Sorry, guys. So we have two experts in the CBD space that will be joining us today, but before I introduce them, I first want to briefly go over the topics that we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about the endocannabinoid system, dosing, do's and don'ts, drug interactions, legal issues. We'll talk about state boards, the FDA, and the DEA. We're going to talk about some new technology, nano and liposomal. Then we're going to cover some marketing tips for CBD and how to talk to your local doctors and customers about CBD. And then we'll take your questions. So here today to help you understand these topics is Evan and Tim Gregorius. Evan is our marketing assistant and CBD advisor here at PRS. He has extensive experience working in the CBD space. Most notably, he has assisted with the formulation of several commercially successful CBD products. He has presented at numerous conferences and trade shows, including the 2019 NCPA Annual Convention. He's one of the lead content creators and contributors of ncpacbdsource.com. And he has worked with numerous CBD companies on their digital marketing efforts and content, and we are happy to have his expertise here today. So our other speaker, our in-house CBD for pharmacy guru, as we like to call him, is Tim Gregorius. Tim is a registered pharmacist who is our current VP of operations here at PRS and also NCPA CBD Source powered by PRS. A major national project launched by NCPA to help independent pharmacies with CBD education, products, and marketing. Tim is an expert in the subject of CBD for pharmacy, and his efforts and research are changing the way pharmacy owners approach CBD. So without further delay, I'm going to turn things over to Tim.
Great, thank you, Linda. Welcome everyone to this webinar. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this. And I also want to congratulate everyone because apparently in light of this coronavirus, we are thought leaders and trendsetters. We had this e-meeting planned long before it was cool, right? You've been signed up for this for a couple of weeks and now everybody's doing it. So anyhow, over the next hour, we're going to update you on what we know today in March 2020. We've been putting presentations together for a while now, and we constantly struggle with whether we present only new content or if we rehash previously covered topics. I've spoken with hundreds of pharmacists at shows and conferences over the past couple of months, and that helped me to realize that we have to offer a blend of the old and the new, because pharmacist understanding of CBD is all over the board. So we're making an assumption that at least some of you are beginners who would be lost if we only jumped right in and started talking about nanotechnology or drug interactions. So we want to sort of cover the bases here between kindergarten and graduate school so that we meet you where you are. So we're going to cover 6 major headings today in this webinar. And we're going to start with a very brief discussion of the endocannabinoid system. We're trying to avoid the worn out, what is CBD? We've done that a couple of times and that seems to be out there everywhere. And hopefully everyone on this call now, you're here because you know what CBD is, you just need to know more about it and how it works. And just for a moment, before we talk about the endocannabinoid system, let me preface this presentation by saying, hopefully I'm here to guarantee that I'm hopefully gonna be able to tell you six things. I said 6, I didn't mean 6. 4 things that you've never heard before. That's what I want to do here today is sort of give you some facts and some trends of where things are going so that you can think about this rather than beating up some old rehashed information. So let's get right to the first subject, the endocannabinoid system review. And again, in those conversations that I've had with pharmacists every day, I can confidently say that most of us don't have a strong understanding of how CBD can have an impact on such a diverse array of conditions affecting several different organ systems. However, as I've said in previous webinars, once you grasp the role that the ECS plays in the human body, that mystery evaporates. How can it work on these different body systems? So you stick with us, and hopefully we'll give you something to say there. I also want to harken back that we went into detail in a previous webinar about the endocannabinoid system, and I suggest you check that out. You can listen to it at twice speed. I'm much less aggravating over the course of a half hour than an hour.
I just want to mention here really quickly, not to interrupt, but those webinars are the links to them are available on ncpacbdsource.com. If you register, you'll be able to access those. In 30 minutes, he's still a little bit aggravating. Not much.
So when we're talking about a quick review here, I really do just want to fly through just a couple of the important concepts. The endocannabinoid system is responsible for homeostasis. So it literally is the mechanism that allows the processes of homeostasis to exist. There are two cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2, that exist in nearly every organ system in the body. And those are acted upon by two primary endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG. I'll let Evan dive a little bit deeper here, and we're not going to go too far and too deep on this, but I want you to hear a brief description of this receptor site interactions and what their resultant actions are.
Sure. So the endocannabinoid system is a system of receptors, enzymes, and signaling molecules, just like dopamine or serotonin. It consists of CB1 receptors located primarily in the brain and the central nervous system, and CB2 receptors located primarily in the body and throughout the immune system and the peripheral nervous system. There are also gene transcription factors like PPAR receptors that modulate genes, that modulate the expression of genes in the immune system, and TRPV receptors that register pain and heat in the peripheral nervous system, as well as our emotional reaction to pain in the central nervous system. These receptors have endocannabinoid molecules as their primary endogenous ligands, and as time goes on, they'll probably be considered part of the ECS because we've known that they exist. We just didn't know their role until more recently, once the ECS was better understood. But as Tim said, the most well-known signaling molecules are anandamide and 2-AG. So what does a healthy functioning endocannabinoid system look like? A doctorate course or program could be taught on this, but to keep it succinct, anandamide is released tonically or constantly to establish a baseline activity level. This can be increased or decreased based on injury or disease and depending on the different body system that this is acting within. 2-AG is released like a traditional neurotransmitter with transient spikes rather than a constant release. And this enables the ECS to have such dynamic activity because of the interplay between these two molecules. And in addition to that, there are also about 10 other signaling molecules and more than 20 other receptors that we've known about for a while now, like I said, but we didn't understand their function until recently, and that they fit into the umbrella of the endocannabinoid system. And ultimately, this system exists at its core to regulate regulation, quote of Ethan Russo's, throughout the rest of the body systems and giving them a mechanism through which to maintain homeostasis. And just to give it a brief example about how pervasive the system is and how it could possibly have such a profound role, that sounds too good to be true, but not once you consider that the endocannabinoid receptors, CB1 receptors, are more numerous in the human body than all other protein receptors combined. There are more than 58% of all G protein coupled receptors are CB1 cannabinoid receptors. So that just is an example.
That is fascinating.
Fascinating.
We bring those facts, and we had that last slide up there for a while, because we really want to show that this is not a fad. We're still getting questions, is CBD a fad? Is this just going to pass? As you can see by the amount of research and science going into this, and the complexity of the system. We're just at the beginning stages of finding out how the endocannabinoid system works. But just because it's new, we can't underestimate it. The endocannabinoid system is every bit as important as the immune system, the cardiovascular system, the endocrine system, et cetera. And I talk to pharmacists all the time who, we end up feeling, well, why don't we know about this? This is, it's almost embarrassing. I was having that conversation with a clinical pharmacist at a conference a couple of weeks ago, Kelsey Schwander from the University of Colorado. She's the founder of B Health Consulting. Kelsey and I were having this conversation about the endocannabinoid system. And she said that in 2012, when she was in pharmacy school, she actually had a cannabis course, an entire course. So the University of Colorado was ahead of certainly everybody in 2012, because even today, it seems that about, and I really haven't researched this number down exquisitely, but about 10% of pharmacy school curriculums and about 10% of medical school curriculums teach the endocannabinoid system. Some of them may mention it, but to actually have a course. So what I don't want is for us to feel sorry for ourselves that we didn't learn this, because that's easy to do. Oh, I wasn't in school. What do I know about this? We really can't do that, because we can't afford to just fake our way through conversations about CBD and expect to be able to counsel our customers if we don't really understand how it works and why. Let me give an example. The immune system, amoxicillin. Certainly when we have dispensed amoxicillin over the years, it's a standard. We do it almost without thinking about it. We explain to finish the medication even once you start feeling better, and plenty of other antibiotics. Well, why do we do that? Because we understand minimum inhibitory concentrations, and we understand how the antibiotic assists the immune system to eradicate the infection. Well, we understand that, and we're able to help the patient, and we're able to answer that question because we have an understanding of the immune system. We don't have to be an expert in it, and most of us probably aren't, but we need a working understanding of how the immune system works to be able to answer that question, right? Well, think of that analogy then, that likewise, we have to have a working understanding of the endocannabinoid system. Again, we don't necessarily need to be the expert to answer a customer's questions, but we really need to understand how it works, because we're going to have a customer, if you haven't already had the customers, ask you, well, how can CBD work for my arthritis, but a friend of mine takes it for anxiety, or takes CBD for a migraine, or a brother-in-law takes it for insomnia? We need to understand the endocannabinoid system, and one of the best ways for you to do that is, we just put up a picture there of Dr. Ethan Russo. He is one of the planet's foremost endocannabinoid researchers. This guy has a lot of what we know and understand today about the endocannabinoid system is because of the last 25 years of his research. So what we did here with Dr. Russo, we just have a couple of minute clip of him talking so you can see how succinctly he communicates complex things across. And again, if you're looking to educate yourself on the endocannabinoid system, which I strongly recommend that you do, Dr. Russo is a great place to start.
Something I haven't mentioned is that in its own right, cannabidiol is an endocannabinoid modulator. In other words, when given chronically, it actually increases the gain of the system, which is at its core a homeostatic regulator. To explain that, homeostasis is a state of balance. Many diseases interfere with the balance in a given system, and if we can bring that balance back to where it should be, there'll be improvement in the overall condition. This is one reason that cannabidiol is such a versatile medicine, because so many disorders operate on that kind of level. So if there's too much activity in the system, homeostasis requires it to be brought back down. If there's too little, it's got to come up. And that's what cannabidiol can do as a promoter of endocannabinoid tone, we call it.
Well, usually when you think of a drug, it goes in one direction or the other, but you're suggesting that CBD really has a bidirectional effect. It can balance either excess or deficiency.
Right.
Can you explain how that works, or is that would require a kind of in-depth scientific
Well,
exegesis?
it would, but looking at the endocannabinoid system, it is sort of a buffer. So CBD can be thought of as a buffer as well. A buffer is something that will work both ways as need be. For example, in the endocannabinoid system, one of its main roles in the brain is to regulate neurotransmitter function. And again, if there's too much of one kind of neurotransmitter, it'll bring it down. If there's too little, it'll bring it up. Without diagrams, that's probably as well as we're going to do this evening.
To follow up with Dr. Russo, I find him fascinating, and he is an endocannabinoid system researcher, not a CBD or THC, but you heard him there refer to CBD as a medicine, and I think that's telling. I want to move on to the next main subject here, and that is dosing. So in talking about dosing, I want to be very clear. I will not give you dosing guidelines today, because there are no guidelines. The FDA has been very clear in stating that the one thing they do not want us doing is making therapeutic claims. No therapeutic claims on labeling, on websites. I mean, that's where the FDA warning letters are generated from primarily. So we surely better not be making distinct dosing recommendations per condition if we're understanding that we can't make a claim that CBD is going to treat those conditions. So that concept leads to the questions that I hear literally every day. Well, Tim, then how do I counsel Mrs. Jones if she asks me how she should take CBD? My best response is to ask Mrs. Jones what she knows about CBD and what her ailment is. She's going to tell you what she knows and understands. You don't have to make that initial statement, basically, and you're going to learn a lot by having Mrs. Jones tell you first about her understanding of CBD and what her ailments are. So that conversation inevitably leads to the question, well, how much should I take? Recall I said that you'll hear a few things today that you have never heard before. Here's number one, because I think I'm out on an island on this one. Conventional wisdom today with the dosing of CBD is to start low and go slow. It's on tons of websites. It's on a lot of product packaging. You'll hear pharmacists and CBD folks talk about start low and go slow. That's a mistake. And here's why we say that. If you start too low and you go slow, you are in danger of losing the patient. There, if it's taking 8 days, 10 days, 15 days for you to titrate up to that therapeutic dose for that patient, you're going to hit that point where they're going to say, well, this crap isn't working, and they're going to move on.
Maybe losing the patient isn't the right terminology.
Good point.
Losing the customer.
And during that process, you're wasting their money while you're experimenting with them. You're wasting their time waiting to titrate that dose up until it's effective. Let me tell you what happened in real life. This is a real life example. I'm going to use my wife. I have her permission to do so. We started low and went high quickly. We started her for her chief complaint, which was arthritis pain. She has, I would say, relatively severe arthritis in her knees and less so in her hands. Pain and inflammation for sure, swelling, and a pinched nerve in her upper back. So we started Lisa, this was almost 3 years ago at Evan's behest. We started Lisa at about a 25 milligram sublingual dose of the CBD oil. And really after a couple of days, really didn't notice anything, not much changed. Said, I might be sleeping better, but not really sure. So instead of going up to 30 milligrams or 35 milligrams and trying that for a few days, I bumped her up to 60 milligrams. After literally less than 2 days, the swelling and the pain and inflammation in her hands went down. She wasn't bothered by the pinched nerve in her neck. I mean, literally, we went from me having to open every jar of mayonnaise and a jar of pickles in the house to I haven't had to do that in 3 years now. Again, you know, you hear stories of this stuff is miraculous, or geez, it doesn't work at all for me. My personal experience is done right, and if you hit that right dose. So we took her up to 60 quick, and then we backed off. We came down, and now we find that 45 to 50 milligrams a day sublingually is what she's on. That may be changing and evolving because of doses, and we're going to actually talk about that a little bit later. But the next question that comes up is, well, for pain and inflammation, you know, what dose should I be using? And rather than giving a dose, and I just pretty much told you what worked for my wife there, but we suggest starting with topicals. That, you know, when you're starting with topicals, now what you can do is if they get some relief from that, and it's going to be transient relief, and it may last a few hours, might last 10 hours. Now you know the patient is responsive to CBD at that area of their body. Now maybe you can add in a different dose. So you're going to stick with the topical and keep them now on a sublingual oil. The thing that we have to be aware of, this is changing and evolving daily. A lot of this is evolving. What we're going to say today might be different 6 months from now, but this discussion, again, as I said, we're going to talk about a little bit later with dosage forms changing. Let's shift topics here a little bit and talk about drug interactions. And I like to bring this conversation up when I'm talking to pharmacists, because this subject serves to sober up a conversation pretty quickly. It gets real when we think of CBD in terms of drug-drug interactions with things like warfarin, valproic acid, clobazam. There are others, and we're going to talk about a few of these others. But I promise you that the convenience store clerk or the vape shop clerk or somebody selling it at the gas station is not going to understand how to talk to your customer. CBD belongs in a pharmacy. There is no better evidence of that than when we start to talk about drug-drug interactions. Let me give you another side story. When I was speaking with Kelsey Schwander a couple of weeks ago, we were talking again about this exact conversation, and there is a narrow therapeutic window, right, for warfarin, and I was asking her how clinically they get around that. She had a unique perspective because she operates out of Colorado, where marijuana is legal. So it is such a reality to the clinician in Colorado that they have to find out if the patient is smoking marijuana, and it's part of the survey. Just like, you know, how many drinks a week do you have? Do you smoke cigarettes? Do you smoke marijuana? And if so, the actual advice is to smoke it regularly if you're going to smoke it. You know, kind of counterintuitive for a clinician to be saying that, but the point being that if they're not smoking it for 5 days and they're smoking pot on the weekends, well, we know there's this interaction with warfarin. That patient could be in danger. So it is that level of interaction. Again, sticking with this notion of, but this is a drug, guys. And when we're thinking about drug-drug interactions, you know, you wouldn't think about dispensing erythromycin, tetracycline, theophylline without talking about the interactions, right? Because we know you know, all the potential interactions that we have there. So those conversations, we now need to be thinking about CBD in that same realm. If somebody's on CBD and taking theophylline and taking some other medication, it's real. We can't pretend we don't know that. Let Evan tell us why it's real. You know, these drug-drug interactions, we don't want them to be a mystery. So Evan, can you talk a little bit about the cytochrome P450?
Sure. So I'm sort of going to dive into the rabbit hole a little bit, and then we'll bring it back out. So CBD affects the cytochrome P450 system, which is essentially the majority of liver enzymes fall under that class, CYP450. CBD affects its ability to metabolize certain drugs, leading to changes in processing times and therefore drug levels. Primarily, CBD affects CYP2C9, CYP2C19, and CYP3A4 in that order. And CYP3A4 metabolizes about 50% of all pharmaceutical drugs. An example of an interaction is with warfarin, like he just mentioned, which is metabolized by CYP2C9. So CBD inhibits CYP2C9, leading to up to a 30% increase in blood levels of warfarin. This has obvious ramifications given the narrow therapeutic window of warfarin, but moreover, the way that the CYP450 system works is that a drug is very rarely metabolized by just one of the enzymes. It's typically metabolized by several of them in different to different degrees. Like 50% of a drug will be metabolized by 3A4 and maybe 20% by 2C19. And just because a drug is metabolized by a certain enzyme doesn't mean that it will necessarily induce that enzyme, and vice versa. So CBD affects 2C9, inhibits 2C9, but it's primarily metabolized by 2C19. Like more than 80% of it is metabolized by 2C19. So that's sort of just an example of how complex this system is. And essentially, the important part is just you need to know if your patients are taking drugs that it will.
Yeah, this is a complex system, is what we're finding out there. As Evan was talking about, induction or inhibition and metabolism, and it's not a simple one-to-one ratio. We need to know that if patients are taking CBD, we need to know what prescriptions they're taking that interact with CBD. So think about when we dispense a new medication to a customer. We immediately think in terms of what class is the drug in, so that we're able to counsel them. What's the mode of action? Where does it act in the body? We have to do that with CBD as well. And the FDA is our usual guide for this information. Obviously the PPI is where we're going to get that if we forgot, but the stuff that we're dispensing every day, we know what we need to say to the patient. Well, the FDA is not so sure about that information. So I'm going to go on to the second thing here, my second promise. I'm going to tell you some things here that you may not have heard before. We're not sure, the FDA is not sure, and pharmacy certainly isn't sure how safe CBD is. It looks like it's safe. There's a lot of people that have taken a high dose for a long time. A lot of people have smoked marijuana for a long time. But now we have tens of millions of people taking CBD every day. And because of these drug interactions, we now have people taking CBD and warfarin and theophylline, and we're going to start to see reactions. I'm going to make a scary prediction here that everything is going to change when the first person dies from a drug-drug interaction with CBD. That scares me. That has my attention, and it's one of the reasons that NCPA and PRS have put this initiative together, the NCPACBDsource.com, is because it is our firm belief that the pharmacist has to be the community drug expert when it comes to CBD. So in October, I had the great fortune of having a few minutes to speak with Dr. Gottlieb, who is the former commissioner of the FDA. I flat out asked him what pharmacists, what pharmacy as a profession should be concerned about with CBD. And without blinking, he said, well, right now there's no long-term studies on the safety of CBD, let alone efficacy studies. Somebody needs to get some studies done, and that needs to happen. So that leads us right into the legality of CBD. Evan is fond of saying that everywhere we look, whether it's a CBD manufacturer, state board statements, the FDA, and even our website, what we say about the legality of CBD sort of sounds like a glorified disclaimer. And that's because we're in a really unique circumstance. Everybody's using it. As I just said, there are maybe 20 or 30 million people a month purchasing and using CBD, but it's not approved yet. So this has everyone, myself included. It's why I'm, walking softly through some of these discussions, like dosing and this legality. Everyone's in a CYA mode. Now, there are clinical trials that are currently being conducted that are FDA approved and refereed. Not going to go into those right now. I'd probably need a an NDA with some companies and some researchers to go into further discussions there. But rest assured that is happening and has been happening for the last year or more, and in some cases for multiple years. So talking about what's happening and what's new on the legality front, in President Trump's 2021 budget, there was a late appropriation approval for $5 million to increase the regulatory and enforcement activities of the FDA, specifically when it was regarding CBD. In researching this, Linda also found, and this was sort of at the bottom of an article, that specifically Congress is looking for the FDA to make a statement on enforcement discretion. So Congress has quietly asked the FDA to go ahead and, please give us some guidance on enforcement discretion. So the point of all of this is evolving, as I've said a couple of times now. It's evolving daily, it's changing daily, and it's different between states. You look, there's 50 states, and we've got 40 of them that are basically on the same page, and you've got probably about 10 of them that have varying levels of conditions set on the sale and use of CBD in that state. And there's no hard and fast rules is the problem there. So we're seeing this difference in interpretation by individual state boards in the absence of very clear FDA guidance.
Not to interrupt you, Tim, but just to let everyone know that's on here, we did have a lot of people ask specifically about their state. So we are going to answer those questions at the end when we get to the question part.
Yep.
So we will answer about the specific states that we were asked about when you submitted your questions before. And you can continue to ask on the chat feature, because we get asked a lot about these. So we'll answer, and sometimes Tim will say he'll answer off air. So
yeah, in a couple of states, I'm not comfortable saying what the state is actually saying.
Right.
But the point of all of this and the legality in 2020 of CBD right now, between state to state, and specifically within pharmacy, because often the pharmacy in a state is held to different standards than another retailer, a non-pharmacy retailer. So what you need to walk away from this knowing is there is a paradigm to be understood, not a single law to know, read, and memorize. This is something you really have to have a bigger picture about what's happening. So the DEA question I get all the time. Somebody is asking a question about dosing, or how do I know that the product has or doesn't have THC? And there is a fear, a common fear, that the pharmacist says, well, I don't want to lose my DEA license. Let me say that the DEA has nothing to do with CBD. So that's another one of those things that you may have not heard in other places. But back in May of 2018, the DEA put out an internal, I guess they didn't put out, but they released an internal directive that the DEA cannot enforce Controlled Substance Act information with respect to products excluded from the definition of marijuana. CBD falls under that definition of products excluded from the definition of marijuana.
Which, not to interrupt you, Tim, but that, drives the point home that, again, that you need to be very careful about what you are stocking on your shelves. That, that is what it says on the label is actually in that bottle.
Yeah, good point. Linda couldn't be more right there. So again, that gets us to this point of you're not going to lose your license if you're selling CBD, because the DEA isn't out looking at CBD. They're going to be enforcing it if you're selling marijuana, then you're in trouble. Well, if you're below 0.3% THC, you're not on their radar. They're not coming after you. So that's just a big one that I wanted to put out there. We can't be stupid, but we've got to be smart about it and say, as long as we're paying attention to the guidelines of the 0.3% THC, the DEA is not in play when it comes to pharmacy. So what's new? What's new with new developments going on? And let me start here, this little section by saying nanotechnology is certainly one of these new developments. And I need to apologize because last summer we were flat out wrong. I said in a webinar last summer that nanotechnology was not going to be relevant in the foreseeable future when it came to CBD. Well, I was absolutely wrong. Apologize for that. So here we were, it was only 3 or 4 months later, and manufacturers had been quietly and secretly developing nanotechnology processes and developing new science. Again, let me turn to Evan to kick off that discussion about nanotechnology and what's new.
Thank you. So, nano CBD sounds like a marketing scam, but nanotechnology refers to nanoparticle encapsulation of an active pharmaceutical ingredient. And the purpose of that is to sort of disguise a hydrophobic drug from hydrophilic media, such as the digestive tract. And also hydrophobic drugs typically undergo extensive first pass metabolism, which causes extremely low bioavailability. So nano CBD is just sort of the layman's term for lipophilic encapsulation of that CBD. Nano delivery of CBD can mean either wrapping a drug in a liposome, which has both hydrophilic and hydrophobic domains, or emulsifying the drug in an amphiphilic medium that forms small bubbles called micelles around the hydrophobic substance, allowing it to pass through the hydrophilic media. And in our graphic, you can see the yellow on the bottom right, the yellow parts are the hydrophobic domains. So that's where CBD would localize. And the white is the hydrophilic part. So you can see how CBD is protected and other hydrophobic drugs are protected in those nanoparticles. Throwing it back to middle school biology, the phospholipid bilayer of a liposome creates that hydrophilic exterior surface and interior cavity almost identical to a human cell. And both of these methods have pros and cons, but both allow more CBD to enter the bloodstream when it's taken orally. In effect, they give CBD water-soluble characteristics, even though, again, that molecule is not water-soluble. And it takes a method called sonication to produce a liposome and to produce a micelle, which is less effective than a liposome. You still need certain a certain nature of the media in which it's happening to be present, which is expensive and it's difficult to achieve. And many CBD manufacturers claiming to have nano or water-soluble CBD simply just have lecithin as an inactive ingredient in their products, which is not sufficient to produce this bioavailability enhancing property.
So that was a lot of information, and it can get complicated quickly. I mean, just look at that slide that's up right now, and Evan was going through some new terminology there. But here's the takeaway. Let's not be freaked out when you hear the terms nanotechnology or liposomal delivery, or that is CBD water soluble or not. These are just ways to simply think about protecting and carrying the CBD molecule through the digestive tract and into the bloodstream, where it can act on its targets throughout the body. Nano is just a simple way to get us around the first pass metabolism in the body. So when we start to think about nanotechnology and liposomal delivery, it looks like everything is changing really quickly. So the evolution here is quicker than I certainly thought it was. It's going to take me to one more statement here that I'm going to go out on a limb and maybe make a prediction that in some point in the foreseeable future, CBD oil is going to be obsolete. This ties back to the dosing questions that we talked about before. Why is someone going to be putting oil under their tongue that tastes funny, is heavy? It's just less convenient. We're dealing with a dropper and having to shake a bottle. If that same amount of CBD can be introduced into the body in a nanotechnology delivery system that increases the bioavailability by sometimes 10 times. So just to give a little relative scale, if you're taking non-nano CBD and say a gummy or a soft gel, you're going to get between 2 and 7% bioavailability. Now we know that the CBD oils, you're going to place an ml or half ml, get your 25, 50, 75 milligrams of CBD oil sublingually, that we're getting between 40 and 70%. And the 70 is pretty high there. That might be 40, 50, 60% they're finding at max of the bioavailability of the CBD oil. Well, this nanotechnology, so now we're back to the edibles, we're back to soft gels, but when they're produced using a nanotechnology liposomal delivery system, we could be getting an 80 or 90% bioavailability. So now we're using less drug, it's cheaper, but most importantly, everybody can take a soft gel. It's no different than swallowing a vitamin E when you look at some of these capsules. So that really could change everything. I'm predicting that we're not going to be seeing, 2 years from now, the CBD oil is going to be an obsolete product. That's a prediction. So you could say, wow, I heard that goofball say that back in early 2020, or you could say, wow, what an idiot who said CBD oil was going to go away. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, the last major subject that we want to cover here before we answer questions, specific questions, is marketing. How do you market CBD in your pharmacy? The better person to answer that question is Linda here, as our marketing director. But I first want to preface what Linda's saying by saying we have to think about this differently. This is not the same as selling Coke and Pepsi in your shiny new cooler up at the front end of the store. This isn't, marketing a new fragrance of soap. This is CBD fits into a completely different niche in the market, and you need to think about it differently. Linda?
Absolutely. So as Tim stated, this isn't like any other product you're selling. You have to think about this differently, and that means marketing it differently. Remember, you have to set yourself apart from the other places selling CBD. You can't just put a sign out that says, we have CBD sold here. I mean, the picture I have up on the screen, we're all used to seeing this. These flags are out everywhere. It's at the gas station. So your approach has to start with education, and really everything having to do with marketing CBD is really about educating yourself, educating your local physicians, educating your customers, and of course your community. So if you don't start with education, how will you differentiate yourself from the vape shop or the gas station or anyone else who has a flag out there? Once you've educated yourself, you should really start by educating your local physicians. Brand yourself as the community CBD expert, share what you've learned about CBD, and suggest that those physicians recommend that their patients come to you for all things CBD.
Yeah, and let me jump in here and say that we don't want you to go outside of your normal scope of practice. This is not something where you have to become some marketing guru to figure out. We're suggesting that you really keep this simple, don't overcomplicate it. This is not even as complicated as putting together a collaborative practice agreement. What you're just doing here is having a relationship with your physicians that you should already have that relationship with anyhow, right? And making sure that they understand that you're the community CBD expert. Help them in their practice with their patients who they might not be sure. The patient might come to them and say, Doc, I'm feeling anxious. Do you think I could, get off of my anxiolytic and, try some CBD? You want him or her to say, yep, go talk to Joe down at Joe's Pharmacy in town.
Absolutely.
Don't overcomplicate this. We just want you to develop these relationships with your physicians and share with them the knowledge that you have.
Absolutely.
You've educated yourself.
Absolutely. So then after you have educated yourself and you started with the physicians, you want to start educating your customers. And I am of course saying educate again, because this is different than marketing. They don't know that there are drug interactions. They have no idea that there are side effects. They see the signs everywhere. We have CBD, so they think it's safe. They're seeing misinformation and false claims everywhere. And you need to be the one to tell them why they should only be buying CBD from you. This needs to be an ongoing, multifaceted campaign using all the usual marketing channels, digital marketing, social media, radio, TV, and print. Inform your customers with bag stuffers, posters, flyers in your store, and most importantly, you're going to talk to them. The message needs to be seen and heard often. I've put together some suggestions here for you that you might be able to implement now and that are cost effective and could have a great ROI. So you want to talk to your local newspapers, news stations, and radio stations, maybe offer to provide a weekly CBD fact, article, or content piece that educates their readers and viewers. Position it almost like a PSA. This is information that you're going to be telling them about CBD that they may have not heard before. They know it's a craze, and many of the news stations and newspapers have maybe done stories on it, but your position is different in that you're trying to educate the public about why they should be coming to you about CBD, because there are drug interactions and there are side effects. So another suggestion we have is maybe hold an event in your store, call it a CBD seminar. It could be for doctors. This could also be for your customers, offer discounts and maybe a chance to learn about CBD from the community CBD expert. I know we have an example of a pharmacist that Tim has spoken to.
Yep. A friend of ours in upstate rural New York, he is selling about $250,000 of CBD a year. So we can all only hope to get to that point where we're as proficient at this as he is. So when I talked to him, I asked him, how'd you get there? How'd you do that? How'd that happen? And again, he said, not magic. He just went and talked to every physician. He educated every physician that he has a relationship with in town, and he showed them why CBD might really help their patients.
Right. And he says he has these kinds of events in his store all the time.
Seminars in his store. He takes information to the doctor, but he said he doesn't let a doctor come in the store without taking them over to the CBD section.
Absolutely.
He understands.
And so, and our final suggestion is you may belong to your local chamber or maybe a networking group for, lunch and breakfast. They're always looking for presentations. That's another suggestion that I think we got from one of our pharmacies that's doing really well selling CBD. So again, I guarantee you that the message that you're going to tell them about CBD is going to be a lot different than what they're hearing from CBD companies and everyone else who's trying to sell CBD. So, what we've put together too here is on NCPA CBD Source, we have a marketing page, so there's some great information on there, but there's also a kit. And you can see here up on your screen all of the information and materials that are in that kit. It's everything that you would need, everything that we just talked about. There's radio scripts in there even, and there's flyers for the doctor. And this is all customizable. You can customize this to your pharmacy, so we definitely invite you to head over to ncpacbdsource.com and check that out. And of course, feel free to call us. I'm going to put Tim's information up there. Our information is all over that site. So if you have any questions at all, you can certainly call and speak to one of our specialists or even Tim.
And you can see there, this is promoting you as the CBD expert. I just think that's critical. That's the centerpiece of all of this. You need to get yourself educated, and this is not rocket science. All of us can do this.
Absolutely. So now we're going to get to the question section. I just want to let everyone know, again, like I said in the beginning, we had hundreds of questions already submitted. And so we've grouped some of those questions together in, subject groups. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to flip past Tim's picture here, but it will be up on the screen again. So really some of the questions that we get the most of are specific state questions. So these are just up on the screen, some of the states that we've gotten asked about. I know somebody actually on here asked about Maine, but it was already on here.
Today,
so yeah, I'm gonna let Tim go ahead.
So let me start with Iowa, North Carolina, and California first. If you're a pharmacist in either any of those three states, your state board has put out some pretty strong language saying do not sell CBD in your pharmacy until they make a further statement based on FDA language. So just not happened yet. If you're in those states, hang tight. Kansas, gotta admit, don't know. Should know, sorry, but whoever the Kansas question is, do not hesitate to call me. In the meantime, I will get myself caught up with the Kansas laws right now. But in terms of Maine, Maine's a confusing state. That's what we said. Somebody asked specifically about Maine.
Somebody asked specifically about Maine today. Yeah.
Up until this past October, Maine was pretty confused, but it seems like they've worked through their confusion right now. They were tripping over CBD as a food additive or a dietary supplement. And so they had banned CBD because it was being added to food. And there's a specific, the specific language of the FDA made it sound like you couldn't sell CBD, but then that was a different caveat about CBD as a food supplement. So the State Board of Pharmacy has since made put out a statement that they are taking no action against pharmacies selling CBD in pharmacies. Michigan. Michigan is an interesting state because marijuana is legal in Michigan, but not CBD. So, you know, that problem, they had to sort of fight their way through this. And again, Michigan tripped over, and that sounds silly, Michigan tripped over it, but Michigan had a problem with food additives or supplements. So CBD is allowed to be sold in Michigan, but you have to be careful with the claims about the food. The state of Washington, again, that comes down to food. The state of Washington had made it okay to create food additives. In other words, you can go into a restaurant and you could have CBD added to your Coke or your iced tea. And they had to come back and say some things about that. So again, these are coming back to the foods, not necessarily the CBD as a medicine, if you will. Minnesota is an interesting one. Minnesota put out very recently, I think literally like about a month ago, could have been in January, they laid out very explicit bullet points of if you're going to sell CBD in your pharmacy, because it is legal to do so, it needed to meet these very explicit criteria. There needed to be a certificate of analysis on the label. There needed to be the address of the lab. There needed to be a description of how much CBD and what other chemicals are in the product. So they're saying, yes, sell CBD, it's legal. Just make sure you have these labeling requirements met.
Absolutely.
So, you know, Florida is also about food. They're considering making CBD a food, not a food additive, a food.
A food.
And so
Wow.
the wording there is kind of interesting.
Awesome. Okay, so the other group of questions, I think we get the most of our brand questions. So everything from, you know, how do I know it's a good brand? Should I carry more than one brand? Why are there so many different prices? Do brands really differ? How many brands should I carry? I mean, there are so many questions relating to brands.
You know, this basic topic, this broad topic here is one of the two main reasons that NCPA and PRS joined forces to create this CBD source website. Is we needed the pharmacists to be educated, so we needed to provide that education, but we also needed to do the vetting and look at the, you know, there's thousands of manufacturers out there, don't know how many thousands of them, to be honest. And what did it make sense for a pharmacist to sell in their store?
Because it's unregulated.
Yeah.
It's unregulated. So
what we did is we set up a criteria for the manufacturers to meet, and there were many items on that criteria list, but you know, a pharmacist owned company, or at least a pharmacist operated company, that there had to be labeling requirements, and there had to be very explicit pledges to not carry any products that had greater than 0.3% THC. We couldn't afford to be telling a pharmacist, here, sell this in your store and it's 5% THC. So those are the brands that we have on this site.
and the independent testing, we test them.
Absolutely. NCPA has really stepped up and is doing the testing. So each of the manufacturers have to provide a COA. They do independent testing of their products, and many of them also do the internal testing. All of ours do, actually. Well, we put another layer of that testing on, and we randomly grab batches off the shelves and do the testing on it. So I wanted to say that about the brands, but these questions here, how do you know a good brand? Hopefully I just answered that, and you come to the ncpacbdsource.com website, and you don't have to have any fear, because you know, we know that you're too busy to be out there vetting them yourself. So
Right.
we vetted them.
Right.
Should I carry more than one brand? For sure. You know, more than one brand of shampoo and toothpaste and colas. Why are there
like options?
Yeah.
People like options.
And you know, certain manufacturers, certain lines of products might have a different strength of a topical, and you know, you want a stronger one or a lighter one. So you've got to look at the products and make those kinds of decisions. The brands really differ, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think Evan had a really good point when he was talking about, nanotechnology and liposomal delivery and how, some of them are saying that they're doing it, but they're really just adding an ingredient that really is inactive, right? It's not helping.
There's no accountability in the industry right now other than, and that's sort of it's one of the things that we're trying to establish.
Provide that.
Yes.
Two national organizations coming together. We were talking with Gottlieb a few months ago. We're establishing these standards because, just like you could say anything on the label and not prove it, you could cook a COA and use Photoshop.
Yep.
You can download any of the labs.
Right.
An example from online and just erase the text and write your own text in with the font.
Yeah, so you could say that you're independently testing, but you're not really doing it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we'll
We got
get
a few minutes here. We're going to answer
Yeah,
about some other questions that are
we have
popping in.
lots of questions.
Let me read this one, John. What is that question that came in?
Somebody just,
You know what? If you have this question here about bioavailability for sublingual versus oral, I have some of that, not off the top of my head. Give me a call.
yeah, the person, if you just submitted that question about bioavailability between sublingual and,
Summer.
Yeah.
Give me a call.
yeah, give Tim a call. His information's up on the screen here. So let's see here. We have, oh my gosh, so many questions. So somebody asked, what are the specific uses for salve? And do all broad spectrum CBDs produce the same physiological response? And how do we know it's working?
Well, we talked about CBD topicals before. Some of the manufacturers call their product a salve, some it's a topical cream, some it's an ointment. I'm going to refer to them here as just topicals, but a topical is a topical and it's delivering CBD locally. Important to note that CBD applied locally, topically, is not absorbed internally. It's not absorbed systemically. So it does have local action. I've got 60-year-old knees. So, after overdoing it on the weekends, I rub CBD into my knees. The result is there. And, we had questions early on. Well, if you're using CBD topically and taking it orally, is there a fear of double dosing? No, doesn't work with topical, not absorbed.
This is a great question. Is there a database with drug interactions anywhere?
There are a couple of them actually, and one that
we actually put it up. We put this. You can actually just demonstrate. Yep. To NCPA CBD source.
.doh.dc.gov, Department of Health.dc.gov has actually put together a pretty good one about drug interactions. I've used MedLink. MedLink gives a lot of really good information. Also come up with CBDoilreview.org if you want to really look into what drugs interact with CBD oil.
And all of those links actually are on NCPA CBD source. We have a page specifically dedicated to drug interactions. There are hundreds of links on that page, but Evan has actually added the ones that Tim just talked about. So
Evan
if you're
has
looking
put
for
hundreds of links on the
yes.
website. So a lot of information.
Great information there. So this is a really good question. Somebody asked, when is the FDA going to change their negative position on CBD?
I don't think they have a negative position because they don't really have a position.
Right. It's neutral. It's
neutral.
cautionary.
Yes.
Cautionary.
They're saying don't make claims. We really need a lot more studies to be done. And those studies are actively going on, that's for sure.
There's a great question here. I'm going to read it exactly as they wrote it. Uses, reliability, standardization, cost, dosage per weight, age, gender, species, and in general, why is it important today and it was not in the 60s?
I thought that was a fascinating question because what it was in the 60s, we were getting THC and CBD. We just didn't know we were getting the CBD.
Yeah, we only have about 30 seconds left here.
Honestly, the endocannabinoid system not being discovered until the mid 1990s, they made that first understanding that there were these phytocannabinoids in marijuana back in the 40s, and in the 60s, we all experimented with it, and into the 70s, and by the 90s, when we all woke up, we realized, oh my goodness, there's a new revelation happening here. And so here we are in 2020. and CBD is for real. It's a medicine. It can be referred to as a medicine, and we need to get caught up.
Awesome. Thanks for attending our webinar, everybody. If you have any questions, Tim's information is up there. Please give us a call. We will be sending you out a link to the webinar as well.
Thanks so much for sharing an hour with us. Don't hesitate to call me, please. Thanks.